This is day 12, and we call this the sermon game, or as Bill Vanderbush told us, it's talking about parables. And we've been instructed to take an object in the room and to make a sermon of it. So as I'm looking around my room, all I can really see is this cup I've had my tea in. Beautiful little cup. And you could make a lot of sermons about a cup. So what am I going to talk about? When I talk about a cup, I can talk about a lot of the things I've seen in the world, a lot of things I've done. One of my hobbies is really understanding cultures and different cultures from around the world. So with this cup, I can talk about the Chinese cultures and history. Over 2,000 years ago, when they spoke about the garden, they spoke about Noah's Ark. Yeah, it's right in their writings. I'd love to tell you about that someday. Or I can tell you about the man and the cup, and as she goes down to the riverside to get water, and the man comes to her to greet her in courtship, and that I've seen in the Zulu tribes in South Africa. But today I want to talk about a different culture, and that culture has to do with a cup. And it's the Jewish culture that existed at the time of Jesus. So let me tell you a story. It is the year 2. It is the year 2 BC, before Christ. And there was a young man named Joe. And Joe wanted to marry this beautiful young girl he saw from a distance. Her name was Mary. And so one day, in accordance with the traditions and the culture that was there at the time, Joe paid a visit to the home of Mary. And as he came into the home, he sat down with the family, the mother, the father, Mary, and all the relatives that were around. And he said to the father, "I've come to ask you if I can marry your daughter." It doesn't matter if she'd ever seen him before. But in the dating culture of that time, you couldn't go out on a date to get to know somebody. So he didn't really know her, and she didn't really know him. So they're sitting in this room, and he's asked the father if he can marry his daughter Mary. So as the custom is, the man must then give to the father some money, a lot of money. And the reason it's a lot of money is because he is giving it in earnest to the father, to say that I'm going to go through with a contract of marriage for your daughter. Earnest money. We still use it today in the English language when we talk about contract, the earnest money. That's what he had in his hand. It was a lot of it. And the reason it was a lot of it, because he was going to go away and not come back for quite some time. So he gave the man the money, and he started talking to the mother and the father and everything going on. And at one point, while he's talking, he gets up and he walks over in front of the girl, and he takes a cup and he pours wine into the cup and puts it down in front of her and carries on with the conversation. It might be a minute later, it might be an hour later, it may be quite some time. But at some point in that evening, that young girl, that Mary, would have taken the cup and she would have put it to her lips and she would have taken a drink from that cup of wine. The act of doing that in the Jewish culture at the time was her acceptance of him as the husband-to-be. He'd then get up quickly and say that he's leaving, and he might not be back for some time, maybe even a year before he comes back, because the custom was when he picked the bride and she accepted him, he then had to leave and go and build a home for her. He couldn't ask somebody to build it. He had to build it with his own hands. He usually built it near his father's home, and he had made the materials or got the materials from the local area, and he built a home. Now it's interesting when he built this home, because you can imagine a young man with all the hormones and everything else, he would just throw up a lean-to and go get his bride, say, "Let's go." But his father had been through all that before him, so he knew better than that. He knew when he brought his bride to that home, they were going to go into that home for 7 days. And in those 7 days, no one could go in and they couldn't come out. And so that home had to have water, had to have facilities for bathing, had to have food in the house, it had to have a good bed in the house, it had to be sound to keep out the weather, it had to be comfortable and good for the woman that was just going to be his bride. And so if you were a guy coming down the road that day and you saw Joe over there building that house, you'd say, "Hey, you're building your house for your bride. When's it going to be finished?" And he'd say to you, "I don't know. Only my Father knows." But back at the time when this happened, the bride, Mary in this case, would have been at home. And she would have had all her friends, the girls around her helping her get everything ready. And she had to wear a veil. Not a veil before you're married, like they do after you're married, like they do today, but a veil before you're married. That's where the custom came from that you see in the Muslim world today. And this veil went to her face because nobody could see who she was. And she was hidden from view, from the world. They all know she was taken, but the veil was on. But her friends were there. And they had to help her with a wedding dress and all the preparations. And something they had to do was they knew the man was coming back. The bride was going to have this man come and get her. He had the right to do it whenever he was ready and his father had released him from his house. And so what he would do, or what she would do, was she was waiting for him. And so while she was waiting, she was getting prepared. She would always be clean. Every night she would put the things beside her bed that she was going to have if he came that night, because he was going to come like a thief in the night. And so she had the veil, she had her wedding gowns and everything else, and she also had a lamp. Because you see, when you walk on the roads in Israel at night, it's a lot of rocks, so you could hurt yourself. So you had to have a lamp, and it had to be ready, oil in it, the wick all trimmed, ready to go. But so did the girls that were with her. They had to sleep at her house every night, waiting for these guys to arrive. So when the big day came, the groom would come, and they would sneak through the town. They didn't want anybody to know they were coming. But the custom said, as he approached the bride's home, he had to yell that they were coming. A huge shout, like a trumpet sound, had to be sounded so that they knew he was coming. And she knew. Didn't matter if she had makeup on or whatever, face cream. She had to get up, put that veil on, get in her dress, and they came in the house. The mother, the father, and the brothers would all put up a little bit of a struggle, of course, but it was all for nothing. They'd already spent the money. They knew they had to go through with this contract. See, a contract was really important because if he or she did not want to go through with the marriage, they had to go and get it annulled in a court of law. This is real serious for them. So here comes Joe with his friends. They've yelled out. She hears it. She wakes up. There's a bit of a commotion. They finally take her all with her veil on, and her girls with her lanterns, and they're all going through the streets singing and dancing and yelling. What a beautiful ceremony it was. Can you imagine if you were sitting there and you heard the noise? You knew it was a wedding, but you didn't know who was getting married because she had the veil on. And so away she went off to get married. So she got to the wedding place. And in she went to the wedding chambers with the groom. And the door was shut behind them. And they weren't going to come out for 7 days. But there was a party going on. All the guests had been invited because the father knew he was going. So he invited all the guests. They had the table set. There was going to be a great big wedding feast that was going to take place when she came out of there. But it was 7 days later. And custom also said that they couldn't really start even to party at all until they knew that the wedding had been consummated. And so the best man stood outside of the door of the wedding chamber. And the groom would then whisper through the door to his best man that the marriage had been consummated. And the party began. You know, it's strange. You find this in Scripture. You know, when you read John chapter 3, everybody knows John 3:16. Go down a little bit, and you're going to hear the verses talking about when the bridegroom speaks to his friend, he knows that the marriage has been consummated. You're going to read it. It's right there in the Bible. Anyway, So the marriage has now been consummated. Out comes the bride and the groom. After 7 days later, they've emerged. They're all happy. Now the veil is gone. Everybody is in a great state of mind. Let's get back to the cup. When she took the drink, she said, I accept you as my husband. Many times we go to church and we say, this is the cup, the blood of my covenant. God made a covenant with us, sealed it with his blood. He asked us to drink of the cup, the very cup of his covenant. Yes, he's promised to come back one day after he's built that house for us and return to us. We're the bride. And he's gone to build that house for us. And every time you take that cup, and every time you lift your Bible, because the Bible is the contract, it's the covenant of God with us. So drink the wine in the communion and say one more time to Jesus, I accept you as the groom, and I am your bride, and I'm waiting here for you, and I love you. Good night.